20 million people watched Elon Musk lean into the camera and with one sentence, rip into Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett. It was cruel, calculated. An instantaneous broadcast live from a flashy Austin studio pulsing with ego and applause. She's just another loudmouth diversity hire with no substance, he sneered. The room erupted. The internet followed. Clips spread like wildfire. And Jasmine, she vanished. No tweets, no interviews. Till 36 hours later, when she stepped into the national spotlight holding a red folder and a $150 million lawsuit that could dismantle Musk's empire. This is the story of how the world's most powerful man ignited a legal firestorm with just 9 words and picked the wrong woman to say them to. Inside the studio, the lighting was harsh, unforgiving. Elon Musk sat like a man who'd already won, soaking in the energy of the real Vision Free Speech Summit. He deviated from the script easily, confidently. Let's be honest, he smirked. We filled Congress with people who look good in quota reports but don't know a damn thing. Then came the sentence that scorched its way into history. She's just another loudmouth. Diversity hire with a law degree and no substance. The crowd laughed not nervously, but openly, triumphantly. Behind him, a still of Jasmine mid-speech appeared on screen, edited for maximum humiliation. The summit's mask slipped. This wasn't about free speech. It was about cruelty with a camera crew. Within 20 minutes, the clip was online. Within 3 hours, it had 2 million reposts. By nightfall, it dominated headlines. Musk calls Representative Crockett a token. The moment wasn't just viral. It was radioactive. And still, Jasmine said nothing. No online statement. No press junket. No shasta. In retreat, but in strategy. Her silence was ancient, purposeful. The kind of quiet you hear before a courtroom door creaks open. 6 hours later, she reappeared live on MSNBC. No entourage, no PR filter, just a gray suit, a red leather folder, and eyes that didn't blink. She didn't waste a word. This is a $150 million defamation lawsuit against Elon Musk, she said, holding up the folder. This isn't about ego. It's about justice for every qualified woman reduced to a stereotype by a man with a microphone. Even the anchor forgot to speak. Jasmine hadn't come to argue. She came to serve notice not just to Musk, but to every person who thinks money makes them untouchable. And this time the notice was legally binding. Musk didn't flinch. 12 hours later, he strutted into a shareholders' conference in Austin as if nothing had changed. Cameras surrounded him. Flashbulbs flared. His smirk was intact. "I'm just exercising free speech," he said calmly. "This country was built on saying uncomfortable truths. I won't apologize just because it offends a few professional victims." It wasn't a defense, it was a dare. Legal experts erupted. Civil rights attorneys debated on live television. If a random guy says it, it's an opinion, one lawyer said. But when the world's richest man broadcasts it to millions, that's defamation wrapped in power. Suddenly, the First Amendment wasn't just a legal shield, it was a battleground. Outside the courtrooms, the real storm brewed. In college halls, in union meetings, on talk radio, and in Sunday sermons, people were talking, especially black women. This wasn't a one-off, said one activist. This was a warning in plain sight, even when you're brilliant. Composed and elected, they can still strip you down to a stereotype. Some called it tech-age lynching. Others called it corporate gaslighting. Within 24 hours, protests erupted in 3 cities, not demanding apologies, but demanding accountability. And through it all, Jasmine stayed silent until night 3, MSNBC. "Liv," the host asked, "what do you want?" Jasmine didn't blink. Her voice was flat, deadly calm. "If he thinks I have no substance, he can test that belief in court." The moment froze, not technically, but emotionally. It wasn't a plea for dignity, it was a demand for judgment. Now the line she'd drawn in the media was about to be tested under oath. Under scrutiny, under the full weight of American justice, the federal courthouse in Washington, D.C. stood like a monument to consequence. The sky hung low and gray, matching the mood, Crowds lined the barricades. Reporters shouted like war correspondents. This wasn't just a case. It was a cultural reckoning in legal clothing. When the glass doors opened, there was no swarm of suits, just Jasmine alone, walking in. Gray suit, red folder, gaze unbreakable. Every footstep was a message. Every click of her heels was a gavel strike. 10 minutes later, Musk arrived. A visual contradiction. Flanked by attorneys and guards, wrapped in wealth and ego, he never looked her way. He didn't have to. Not yet. Inside the courtroom, the air was thick. Every seat filled. Legal giants, civil rights groups, 5 continents of journalists. The smell of oak and ink and pressure. At 9:01 a.m., Judge Ruth Delgado entered. No fanfare, just force opening. Statements were skipped. The prosecution moved straight to exhibit of the recording. The lights dimmed. The screen flickered to life. Then there was Musk, grinning into the camera. She's just another loudmouth diversity hire with a law degree. And no substance. It didn't land like it did on the internet. In the courtroom, it didn't echo. It hung heavy, undeniable. A juror stiffened. Another exhaled slowly. They weren't laughing. They were listening. This wasn't a meme. This was evidence. And then Jasmine stood. No drama, no performance. Just power. She walked to the center of the room with the poise of someone who'd been underestimated. Her entire life was done asking for respect. She was here for a verdict, and this time, silence. Wasn't her weapon? Truth was. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. What Jasmine Crockett did was more devastating. She spoke plainly, calm, clear, and she spoke for millions. This isn't a personal opinion, she began, her voice steady and resolute. This is an attack not just on my character, but on the legitimacy of every black woman who dares to lead, to speak, to exist outside the margins they've drawn for us. She paused, letting the truth settle like a storm cloud before it breaks. He didn't just insult me, she continued. He weaponized the idea that we don't belong, and he broadcast that weapon to millions who already want us silenced. She didn't blink. She didn't ask for sympathy. She turned and looked directly at the jury, not as victims, but as witnesses. Witnesses to a public wound, delivered not in secret, but on a global stage. Then Elon Musk stood. He adjusted his cufflinks slowly, deliberately, as if to remind the courtroom that he answered to no one's timeline but his own. When he finally spoke, his voice wasn't raised. It was dismissive. I just told the truth, he said, his tone casual. Freedom means saying what others are too afraid to. That's courage, the courage to say the unsayable. He didn't. Look at Jasmine. He didn't need to. His words weren't a rebuttal. They were a challenge. A declaration that no courtroom, no Senate, no social media backlash would ever make him answer to those he deemed beneath him. The courtroom didn't erupt. It didn't have to. The silence that followed his words was louder than anything spoken, and still, Jasmine stood unmoved. Because in that silence, the country was starting to hear hurl, louder than ever. But if Elon Musk thought that bravado would go unanswered, what came next would prove Jasmine hadn't come with emotion alone. She came with evidence, names, receipts, and a digital trail soaked in intention. The courtroom lights dimmed slightly as a clerk rolled in a large screen, its display already flickering. Jasmine stepped forward, expression unreadable, movements precise. Your Honor, she said, holding up a printed document. We'd like to submit into evidence this internal SpaceX memo dated March 14, 2022. She clicked a remote. The memo appeared on screen. Bold type, intent. Subject: internal communication policy, race, identity, and social topics. One line, highlighted in red, stood out. Employees are encouraged to avoid discussions of racial equity or systemic bias during work hours, including internal Slack channels or meetings. The jury leaned forward. This wasn't subtle, it was corporate. Censorship disguised as policy. A company-wide silencing order dressed up as professionalism. Jasmine didn't add commentary. She didn't have to. The document spoke like a confession whispered under oath. Then the doors opened again. A witness took the stand. Elijah Grant. Mid-30s. Former senior engineer at Tesla. His suit slightly rumpled. His hands steady, but his voice trembling at first. I worked at Tesla for 7 years. Top 3 in performance reviews. 2 patents, he said. But every time I applied for a leadership role, I was told I wasn't the right cultural fit. He paused. The people who were promoted over me, all white, all junior. He glanced at Musk, then back to the jury. When I raised concerns to HR, I got a warning. The second time, my contract wasn't renewed. The air turned heavier. This wasn't anecdote, it was pattern. And Jasmine was ready. With a single tap, the screen changed. A live data visualization appeared. Bright dots lighting up across a digital map, not like stars in a night sky, but like a battlefield, this Jasmine said. Shows user activity on Platform X 30 minutes after Mr. Musk's podcast aired. The dots multiplied rapidly, aggressive, relentless. Over 42,000 posts, retweets, and online attacks targeting Jasmine exploded across the platform. Some were memes, others doctored videos. Most were cruel, racist comments disguised as political opinion. This wasn't a reaction, Jasmine said. This was a digital firing squad. Then came her next witness, Marcia Tien, systems expert, MIT trained, quiet, precise. We analyzed the activity patterns, she explained. Speed, timing, source locations. She pointed to a red cluster. Pulsing on the screen, this was coordinated, not organic. Most of the accounts were created just weeks before the podcast aired. This wasn't an accident. It was algorithmic aggression, targeted at Miss Crockett. The courtroom froze, and just as the weight of that revelation sank in, Jasmine revealed something darker. A synthetic lie engineered not just to smear, but to destroy. The lights dimmed. A video began to play. It appeared to show Jasmine at a podium, speaking to a small crowd. American soldiers are trained killers who deserve no praise. Her likeness said the sentence landed like a slap. This was the clip that had gone viral. 2 days after Musk's podcast condemned by veterans groups, was dissected on cable news and used to brand her as un-American. Now, her legal team paused the video and dismantled it piece by piece. A digital forensics expert stepped forward. Watch. Closely, he said. He slowed the footage. Frame by frame, he pointed to subtle errors, micro-expressions that didn't match the words. Lighting mismatches, audio anomalies. This is a deep fake, he said firmly. Miss Crockett never said these words. Someone used AI to copy her voice and face. This video is fake. A low murmur moved through the courtroom. For weeks, this had shaped the national perception of her, and it was a lie. But Jasmine wasn't done. Her attorney stepped forward. The next slide showed a chartreuse of account handles and digital fingerprints. Analyze the accounts that spread the video, he said. Over 18,000 shares in the first hour, all from bots with identical patterns. Then the hammer dropped. We traced the upload's origin to a marketing firm hired by Platform X. The room recoiled. This wasn't foreign interference. It wasn't a lone troll. It was a company under Musk's control. His attorney stood. Quickly, smooth, and composed. We don't control what goes viral, he said. This is just the nature of the internet. Unfortunate, but random. But Jasmine's team wasn't finished. The final slide appeared. Internal Slack messages from Platform X moderators. One employee flagged the video early. We should take this down. It's fake, another replied. Leave it up. It's helping. The right people. The jury didn't see a platform anymore. They saw a machine, and a man who let the machine lie. Then, Jasmine walked slowly to the stand. Not with anger. With evidence, she handed the clerk a thick folder. As the documents appeared on screen, the jury saw names canceled events, rescinded invitations, and withdrawn contracts. A civil rights org had canceled her keynote. A university pulled her guest. Lecture. A law firm revoked a speaking fee, all within 48 hours of Musk's clip going viral, one by one. She showed how the lie spread and what it cost. And in that room, finally, the damage wasn't abstract. It had names, dates, and proof. Not just of harm, but of intent. They didn't have to say it was because of the clip, Jasmine said, her voice firm but measured. They didn't need to. I saw it in their silence. The screen behind her faded to black dot. Then a simple waveform appeared. Voicemail began. To play, the voice wasn't angry. It was gleeful, hateful in the way only intimacy can make cruelty feel. You deserve to be dragged behind a truck. We're watching you. Click. Silence. Not a breath moved in the gallery. No cough, no shuffle, no murmur. It was no longer a question of whether harm had been done. The room had heard it next. Jasmine's team called their witness. Dr. Celeste Manning entered with quiet authority. Licensed clinical psychologist with 2 decades of trauma expertise. She carried only a notepad and a steady presence. Her tone was clinical, but her words hit hard. I've met with Congresswoman Crockett 4 times over the past month, she said. She presents symptoms consistent with trauma-related stress-disrupted sleep, hypervigilance, loss of appetite, recurring panic episodes. She paused, then continued with gravity. These symptoms are directly linked to the public harassment that followed Mr. Musk's broadcast. She meets criteria for mild post-traumatic stress disorder. Her emotional distress is not speculative. It is observable, traceable, and medically documented. Jasmine didn't flinch. She didn't drop her gaze. She let the truth settle like sediment over ground that had shaken. It's too long. Then came the response. Musk's lead attorney stood with the calm of someone trained to mop up disaster. He adjusted his cufflinks, spoke with the polish of detachment. There's no direct proof of loss, he said. There's no contract that says we dropped her because of Elon Musk. Emotional discomfort is unfortunate, but it is not legally actionable. His words were deliberate, designed to sterilize pain with legal language. But before he could sit down, Jasmine's team cued their next exhibit. The lights dimmed again. The second voicemail began to play. This time, the voice was deeper, slower, more menacing. We know where your mother lives. Then static. Then silence. A juror covered her mouth. The clerk closed their eyes. The room didn't feel like a courtroom anymore. It felt like something raw, exposed real. And Jasmine, still standing, didn't speak. She didn't need to, because this wasn't just about fear. It wasn't just about loss. It was about the price women pay when power decides they've become too loud to ignore. The room was breathless. But Jasmine wasn't done. Because pain, while undeniable, wasn't the whole story. Not here. Not now. What mattered was naming the cause and daring to do it in the light. She stood in the center of the room, not with arrogance, but with earned gravity. She didn't pace. She didn't gesture. She stood. Her gaze moved across the jury. No desperation. Only purpose. And when she spoke, her voice was low but sharp, each syllable deliberate. If I had no value, she said, he wouldn't have needed to humiliate me in front of 20 million people. The sentence cracked through the silence. Like glass under pressure, it didn't ask for applause. It asked for understanding. Not political understanding. Human understanding. The kind that peels back headlines and looks goddessly at what was done. A woman stripped not by truth, but by a man who had never paid a price for the weight of his words. Her hands stayed still. Her eyes never wavered. She didn't plead with the jury. She challenged them to see what this case was really about. Not bruised egos, not bad opinions, but the system that turns cruelty into currency behind her. The red folder sat where it had since the beginning, quiet, heavy, full of names and dates and receipts. She didn't point to it. She didn't need to. She had become the evidence. Then Musk stood, not urgently, not shaken, almost like it was just another scene in a movie he still believed he was directing. He adjusted his cuffs again, slowly, deliberately, the way men do when they think the room still bends to them. And then he spoke. I don't apologize. For the truth, he said. I said what everyone else is thinking, but too afraid to say. His voice was smooth, not because it came from clarity, but because it came from distance. He wasn't talking to the jury. He wasn't even talking to us. Jasmine. He was talking to an invisible crowd, one that applauded power without conscience. Wealth without consequence. He didn't defend himself. He dared them to touch him. The judge gave the signal. 12 jurors rose, their faces unreadable. Their backs straight, they filed out through a side door. The sound of their shoes echoed like thunder across a room that had gone perfectly, frighteningly still. No whispers, no shuffling. Not even the court reporter moved. It was the silence of gravity, the kind that falls when something massive is broken. And everyone is waiting to see if it left a crack or a crater. When the jury returned, it wasn't just a verdict they carried. It was the weight of everything they had just seen, heard, and felt. The foreperson stepped forward, folded sheet trembling slightly in her hand. She scanned the room and then locked eyes with the judge. The jury, she began, her voice clear, find in favor of the plaintiff. We award damages in the amount of $150 million. The words didn't echo. They landed like steel, like finality. You could feel it, the room absorbing what had just happened. Not a symbol, not a gesture, a consequence, a cost. The judge waited, then added what Musk hadn't expected. In addition to monetary damages, Elon Musk was ordered to publish a formal, written apology. It would be posted on the platform he owned, pinned to the top of his profile for no less than 30 days. But there was more. He was also mandated to fund an anti-discrimination initiative in the tech sector. One focused specifically on combating algorithmic bias and digital harassment. No loopholes. No vague timelines. Binding. Visible. Public. Jasmine didn't flinch. She didn't move, but something in her expression shifted. Not relief, not victory. Resolve. A quiet nod, small, but immovable across from her. Elon Musk remained seated. His back was still straight, but something had folded inward. His hands, once animated, were now clenched. He didn't speak. He didn't protest. He didn't concede. He simply sat, as if stunned that the machine he'd built had finally actually stopped. For the first time, his silence wasn't strategy. It was vacancy. The courtroom began to stir. The scrape of chairs. The rustle of paper. Reporters rushing out, already typing headlines with trembling thumbs. Outside, the sound built like distant thunder. A crowd roared, fists in the air. Signs shook in the wind. And when Jasmine stepped out, they erupted. Not with celebrity praise, but with something deeper. Recognition. She didn't smile. She didn't wave. Her steps were slow, measured. This wasn't a celebration. This was a breach, a shift, a beginning. Because the verdict wasn't the end, it was the opening tremor. And the first to feel it wasn't the courtroom. It was the empire. Behind the man who had just lost. At 9:42 a.m. the next morning, the numbers began to fall. Not opinions, but hard value. Tesla stock plunged 7.8% by midday. Over $56 billion in market value gone within hours. Analysts scrambled. Bloomberg screens turned red. Phrases like investor confidence, crisis, and brand erosion flashed across the networks. And behind it all, one verdict still rang louder than any market bell. Words have weight, and this time they cost. This wasn't just volatility, it was abandonment. By noon, the cracks had become a landslide. PepsiCo was first, a blunt statement. All advertising on Platform X suspended indefinitely. No fanfare, just a firm break. Within an hour, Verizon followed. Then Nike. Their reasons were clear concerns over ethical oversight, misalignment with company values. These weren't statements of protest. They were exits. Quietly, a major EV infrastructure partner pulled out of a Tesla deal that had been scheduled to close that week. No public announcement, just a vanished handshake. The message was unmistakable. The brands that once leaned on Musk's genius were no longer willing to carry his gravity in a scramble to salvage control. Musk attempted a digital pivot, he announced. A surprise live stream set for that evening, a counter-narrative, he claimed. Unfiltered truth, the teaser read, complete with a dramatic countdown timer and shadowy promo clips. It flooded Platform X, but when the timer hit 0, the response fell flat. The live stream opened not to fanfare, but to a hush. The viewer count, once known to soar into the millions, stalled just above 200,000. The comment feed lagged thin. Hesitant. It pulsed not with loyalty, but fatigue. Musk sat alone in a sleek, sterile studio. Minimalist graphics framed him. The lighting was flawless. His mic, too perfect. He spoke of media bias, awoke courts, the price of truth in a broken society. But his words fell like dust in a sealed room. They didn't stir. They didn't cut. They barely registered once magnetic. His presence now felt manufactured, scripted, hollow. Musk's voice remained measured, but his eyes flickered not with fire, but disbelief. This wasn't just a PR collapse. It was erosion. The machine he had built wasn't being dismantled. It was walking away from him. One comment lingered longer than it should have, rising slowly in the chat feed before vanishing back into the haze. It wasn't the court that buried you. It was the mirror. Musk didn't acknowledge it, kept talking, but the silence had become louder than his voice, and far beyond the broadcast. Another voice had begun to rise, not louder, but clearer. It came from kitchen tables and prison letters, dorm rooms and hospital beds. It came in handwritten notes and typed missives, folded carefully or scrawled in haste. After the verdict, Jasmine Crockett's world didn't shrink with exhaustion. It expanded with echoes her congressional mailbox, once full of policy proposals, and legislative drafts, had become something else entirely, a monument to shared pain. Letters poured in by the hundreds, then thousands. Postmarked from Mississippi churches, South Bronx housing projects, Arizona reservation clinics. A teacher from Chicago wrote, "When they mocked your voice, I heard them mocking mine." A retired Air Force veteran in Louisiana mailed a single line on a blank page. "You stood your ground for people like me even when I didn't know we still had one." The ink bled in places. Some paper smelled of perfume, others faintly of smoke. These weren't fan letters. They were testimony. Witness statements from a generation that had learned to survive by shrinking themselves. One envelope had no return address. Just the initials RE inside, a typed letter from a former SpaceX employee. They had been told to be less political. After recommending the company recognize Juneteenth as a paid holiday, another wrote of resumes with ethnic names being flagged for extra review. No emotion, just precision. Some letters read like depositions. Others included screenshots, timestamps, Slack threads. Jasmine read. Every one. She didn't mark them for evidence. She marked them for remembrance. Because this wasn't just misconduct, it was the blueprint of a silencing system one Musk had personified, and she had cracked open. The media shifted. Newsrooms recalibrated. Where once her name was linked to words like defiant or angry, now it came with new adjectives: measured, deliberate, rising. Editors who had once ignored her now scrambled to book interviews. She didn't chase them. She appeared only where it mattered. A Sunday panel with civil rights historians. A digital town hall hosted by Black women CEOs. Quiet live stream with a former Tesla engineer, voice disguised, location withheld. These weren't victory laps, they were excavations. Jasmine wasn't trying to become the story. She was trying to show just how deep it went. When the invitations came from The View, Meet the Press, CBS This Morning, she accepted on her terms. No dramatic music. No applause intros. No glowing graphics. She walked into each studio with the same calm, steady gait she carried into the courthouse. One host asked her plainly, "How does it feel to take down someone like Elon Musk?" Jasmine didn't blink. She leaned into the mic, just slightly, and replied, "I didn't win a lawsuit. I won my voice back." The words weren't rehearsed. They were built from every sleepless night, every voiceless moment, every time she had been expected to stay small. Behind the camera, the studio fell still. The crew didn't cut to commercial. The next question was skipped. It wasn't finished. But it was final. She wasn't speaking about Elon anymore. She was speaking about all of them. The women told they were too loud. The black professionals called diversity hires. The advocates branded angry just for asking to be heard. After one segment, producer slipped her a note. "My daughter watched your testimony," it read. "She asked if she could be like you. I told her she already is." But the letters kept arriving. A fifth-grade class in Detroit sent hand-drawn pictures Jasmine in a superhero cape. A retired judge in Atlanta sent a 6-page reflection on Thurgood Marshall and what he would have thought of her cross-examinations. A woman in her 70s included a photograph herself being arrested during a 1963 sit-in. "It took 60 years," she wrote, "but today, I feel like I won." Jasmine framed that one. It hangs across from her Noglast red folder, not a trophy, but a reminder of what truth looks like when it's prepared and unafraid. Other messages were quieter, anonymous, typed in courier font, mailed from rural post offices. "I worked in data engineering at X. You weren't wrong. I raised concerns about bias in the algorithm. I lost my job 3 weeks later. They weren't public acts of defiance. They were scars whispered into envelopes." Jasmine responded to each, even if she couldn't sign them. Sometimes just with a single word: her dot. She didn't make speeches about revenge. She didn't rebrand. Her team urged her to write a memoir, start a podcast, launch a clothing line. She told them, not yet. Because the point wasn't how loud her voice could become, it was how many voices it could make room for. She didn't want to dominate the story. She wanted to break it open. Power. She told a group of law students at Howard University, "Isn't what you say into the mic? It's what happens when you put the mic down and people are still speaking." And they were from Oakland to Baton Rouge, from software developers in Seattle to cafeteria workers in Tulsa. They repeated her words not as a slogan, but as a signal. "I didn't win a lawsuit. I won my voice back." It was spray-painted on walls, screen-printed on T-shirts, etched into classroom walls. Not because it was catchy, but because it gave language to something millions had felt and never named. The quiet theft of self-worth. The humiliation of being seen but never heard. Jasmine never called herself a hero. She never let herself be made into one. What she had done wasn't heroic. It was necessary, and it was dangerous. Because it didn't just challenge man, it challenged a System A culture that had mistaken dominance for innovation and cruelty for vision. Her victory didn't end a war. It simply revealed that one had been raging all along, and now, if anyone wanted to speak over her, they'd have to look her in the eye first. Because Jasmine Crockett had not just survived the machine, she had made it answer. It wasn't mandated. It wasn't performative. It was voluntarian. It was unflinching. The policy that shook the tech world was drafted by a team, funded directly from the legal settlement Elon Musk had lost. Jasmine Crockett had allocated half of her awarded damages to launch a nonprofit, the Truth in Tech Fund. It wasn't built on retaliation. It was built for repair. Their first major release? A comprehensive framework for platform accountability called the Honor Coda, document that demanded third-party audits of public statements, algorithmic bias reviews, and a bold new clause. Tech CEOs must disclose any potential conflicts of interest before commenting on politically or socially sensitive topics. For the first time, Silicon Valley was handed a mirror it couldn't wave away as noise. Then, something unexpected happened. LinkedIn's CEO publicly endorsed the code, declaring, "The internet can be free and still be humane." The ripple effect was immediate. At Columbia, law students began citing Crockett v. Musk as a milestone in digital responsibility. Howard University launched a new elective speech, Power and Platform Law Code, developed with Jasmine's team, Atlantic Think. Peace called her the quiet architect of digital constitutionalism. But Jasmine didn't pause to revel in it. She kept building until one day, she stepped onto a very different stage. Vancouver, the global TED stage. Under a halo of lights were presidents. Philosophers and scientists had stood. Jasmine walked into the red circle. Her talk was titled with haunting simplicity, "Freedom is not a weapon." She didn't pace. She didn't shout. She stood still. Her voice was low, conversational, but her words hit like tectonic shifts. We were taught that freedom of speech is sacred, she said, but no one told us how often it's used to silence. The room froze. She told the story not as a drama, but as a pattern. A billionaire called me a loudmouth diversity hire with no substance. I could have clapped back online, but I didn't. I sued him not because my ego was bruised, but because my silence was supposed to be the end of the story. And then she paused, and I wasn't the only one they wanted silent. She spoke of the Tesla engineer who couldn't speak up, the Mississippi girl told to stop raising her hand, the grandmother too afraid to wear her natural hair to church. The audience was breathless. Free speech, she said, was never meant to be free from consequence. What we protect isn't speech, it's the speaker. And when the speaker controls algorithms, stock prices, and digital mobs, then their speech becomes policy, whether written or not. Applause thundered, but Jasmine didn't smile. She delivered her final line with calm, devastating clarity. I'm not here to cancel speech. I'm here to reclaim it. Because when someone builds a megaphone and uses it to drown out the rest of us, that's not freedom. That's tyranny with Wi-Fi. The talk went viral, 42 million views. Subtitled in 19 languages. Quoted, reposted, studied not because she won a lawsuit, but because she had reframed the entire question, who gets to define harm, and who pays the price for someone else's microphone? Even then, Jasmine refused to be the hero of her own story. In interviews, she gently corrected reporters, this isn't about one man. It's about what we've allowed to fester in silence. On podcasts, she urged listeners not to quote her, quote the janitor who got fired for speaking up, quote the mother who lost her son to an algorithm. At her press conference, she stepped aside, letting a former black engineer from a major tech firm speak first. She had already passed the torch back in D.C. Lobbyists scrambled to water down the new legislation her nonprofit proposed, but resistance met a tidal wave. One senator received 1.2 million emails in support at a tense congressional hearing. A Republican lawmaker from Texas asked, "Aren't you afraid this limits what people can say?" Jasmine held his gaze. Afraid of what people have already said with no accountability when their words turn into violence. The room fell silent. Later, in a news interview, a journalist asked how she stayed so calm through it all. Jasmine looked off camera and said softly, because I've been underestimated my whole life. But this time, they underestimated what silence becomes when it finally decides to speak.